Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, Vintage International. Chapter 20. I had been away long enough for the streets to seem strange. The uptown rhythms were slower and yet were somehow faster. A different tension was in the hot night air. I made my way through the summer crowds, not to the district, but to Barrel House's Jolly Dollar, a dark hole of a bar and grill on Upper 8th Avenue, where one of my best contacts, Brother Maceo, could usually be found about this time having his evening's beer. Looking through the window, I could see men in working clothes and a few roomy women leaning at the bar. And down the aisle between the bar and counter were a couple of men in black and blue checked sports shirts eating barbecue. A cluster of men and women hovered near the jukebox at the rear. But when I went in, Brother Maceo wasn't among them, and I pushed to the bar, deciding to wait over a beer. "Good evening, brothers," I said, finding myself beside two men whom I had seen around before, only to have them look at me oddly, the eyebrows of the tall one raising at a drunken angle as he looked at the other. "Shit," the tall man said. "You said it, man. He a relative of yourn?" "Shit. He goddamn sure ain't no kin of mine." I turned and looked at them. The room suddenly cloudy. "He must be drunk," the second man said. "Maybe he thinks he's kin to you." Then his whiskey's telling him a damn lie. I wouldn't be his kin even if I was. Hey, Barrel House." I moved away, down the bar, looking out of a feeling of suspense. I moved away down the bar, looking at them out of a feeling of suspense. They didn't sound drunk, and I had said nothing to offend, and I was certain that they knew who I was. What was it? The brotherhood greeting was as familiar as, "Give me some skin," or "Peace, it's wonderful." I saw Barrel House rolling down from the other end of the bar, his white apron indented by the tension of its cord so that it looked like that kind of metal beer barrel which has a groove around its middle. And seeing me now, he began to smile. "Well, I'll be damned if you ain't the good brother," he said, stretching out his hand. "Brother, where you been keeping yourself?" "I've been working downtown," I said, feeling a surge of gratitude. Fine, Barrel House said. "Business good?" "I'd rather not discuss it, brother. Business is bad. Very bad." "I'm sorry to hear it. You'd better give me a beer," I said, "after you've served these gentlemen." I watched them in the mirror. "Sure thing," Barrel House said, reaching for a glass and drawing a beer. "What you putting down, old man?" he said to the tall man. "Look here, Barrel, we want to ask you one question," the tall one said. "We just wanted to know if you could tell us just whose brother this here cat's supposed to be. He come in here just now calling everybody brother." "He's my brother," Barrel said, holding the foaming glass between his long fingers. "Anything wrong with that?" "Look, fellow," I said down the bar, "that's our way of speaking. I meant no harm in calling you brother. I'm sorry you misunderstood me." "Brother, here's your beer," Barrel House said. "So he's your brother, eh, Barrel?" Barrel's eyes narrowed as he pressed his huge chest across the bar, looking suddenly sad. "You enjoying yourself, McAdams?" he said gloomily. "You like your beer?" "Sure," McAdams said. "It cold enough?" "Sure, but Barrel, you like the groovy music on the juke?" Barrel House said. "Hell yes, and you like our good, clean, sociable atmosphere?" "Sure, but that ain't what I'm talking about," the man said. "Yeah, but that's what I'm talking about," Barrel House said mournfully. "And if you like it, like it. And don't start trying to bug my other customers. This here man's done more for the community than you'll ever do. What community? McAdams said, cutting his eye around toward me. I hear he got the white fever and left. You liable to hear anything, Barrelhouse said. That's some paper back there in the gents' room. You ought to wipe out your ears. Never mind my ears. Ah, come on, Mac, his friend said. Forget it. Ain't the man done apologized? I said never mind my ears, McAdams said. You just tell your brother he ought to be careful about who he claims as kinfolks. Some of us don't think so much of his kind of politics. I looked from one to the other. I considered myself beyond the stage of street fighting, and one of the worst things I could do upon returning to the community was to engage in a brawl. I looked at McAdams and was glad when the other men pushed him down the bar. That McAdams thinks he's tight, Barrelhouse said. He's the kind can't nobody please. Be frank, though. There's lots feel like that now. I shook my head in bafflement. I'd never met that kind of antagonism before. What's happened to Brother Maceo? I said. I don't know, brother. He don't come in so regular these days. Things are kind of changing up here. Ain't much money floating around. Times are hard everywhere. But what's been going on up here, Barrel? I said. Oh, you know how it is, brother. Things are tight and lots of folks who got jobs through you people have lost them. You know how it goes. You mean people in our organization? Quite a few of them are. Fellows like Brother Maceo. But why? They were doing all right. Sure, they was. As long as you people were fighting for them. But the minute y'all stopped, they started throwing folks out on the street. I looked at him, big and sincere before me. It was unbelievable that the Brotherhood had stopped its work, and yet he wasn't lying. Give me another beer, I said. Then someone called him from the back, and he drew the beer and left. I drank it slowly, hoping Brother Maceo would appear before I had finished. When he didn't, I waved to Barrelhouse and left for the district. Perhaps Brother Pratt or Brother Tarp could explain, or at least tell me something about Clifton. I walked through the dark block over to 7th and started down. Things were beginning to look serious. Along the way, I saw not a single sign of Brotherhood activity. In a hot side street, I came upon a couple striking matches along the curb. Kneeling as though looking for a lost coin, the matches flaring dimly in their faces. Then I found myself in a strangely familiar block and broke out in a sweat. I had walked almost to Mary's door, and turned now and hurried away. Barrelhouse had prepared me for the darkened windows of the district, but not, when I let myself in, to call in vain through the dark to Brother Tarp. I went to the room where he slept, but he was not there. Then I went through the dark hall to my old office and threw myself into the desk chair, exhausted. Everything seemed to be slipping away from me, and I could find no quick, absorbing action that would get it under control. I tried to think of whom among the district committee I might call for information concerning Brother Clifton. But here again I was balked. For if I selected one who believed that I had requested to be transferred because I hated my own people, it would only complicate matters. No doubt there would be some who'd resent my return, so it was best to confront them all at once without giving any one of them the opportunity to organize any sentiment against me. It was best that I talk with Brother Tarp, whom I trusted. When he came in, he could give me an idea of the state of affairs, and perhaps tell me what had happened to Clifton. But Brother Tarp didn't arrive. I went out and got a container of coffee and returned to spend the night poring over the district's records. When he hadn't returned by 3 a.m., I went to his room and took a look around. It was empty. Even the bed was gone. I'm all alone, I thought. A lot has occurred about which I wasn't told. Something that had not only stifled the members' interest, but which, according to the records, had sent them away in droves. Barrel House had said that the organization had quit fighting, and that was the only explanation I could find for Brother Tarp's leaving, unless, of course, he had disagreements with Clifton or some of the other leaders. And now, returning to my desk, I noticed his gift of Douglas's portrait was gone. I felt in my pocket for the leg chain. At least I hadn't forgotten to take that along. I pushed the records aside. They told me nothing of why things were as they were. Picking up the telephone, I called Clifton's number, hearing it ring on and on. Finally, I gave it up and went to sleep in my chair. Everything had to wait until the strategy meeting. Returning to the district was like returning to a city of the dead. Somewhat to my surprise, there were a good number of members in the hall when I awoke, and having no directives from the committee on how to proceed, I organized them into teams to search for Brother Clifton. No one could give me any definite information. Brother Clifton had appeared at the district as usual up to the time of his disappearance. There had been no quarrels with committee members, and he was as popular as ever. Nor had there been any clashes with Roz the Exhorter, although in the past week he had been increasingly active. As for the loss of membership and influence, it was a result of a new program which he called for the shelving of our old techniques of agitation. There had been, to my surprise, a switch in emphasis from local issues to those more national and international in scope. And it was felt that for the moment the interests of Harlem were not of first importance. I didn't know what to make of it, since there had been no such change of program downtown. Clifton was forgotten. Everything which I was to do now seemed to depend upon getting an explanation from the committee, and I waited with growing agitation to be called to the strategy meeting. Such meetings were usually held around 1 o'clock, and we were notified well ahead, but by 11:30 I had received no word and I became worried. By 12 an uneasy sense of isolation took hold of me. Something was cooking, but what? How? Why? Finally, I phoned headquarters, but could reach none of the leaders. What is this? I wondered. Then I called the leaders of other districts with the same results. And now I was certain that the meeting was being held, but why without me? Had they investigated Restrom's charges and decided they were true? It seemed that the membership had fallen off after I had gone downtown. Or was it the woman? Whatever it was, now was not the time to leave me out of a meeting. Things were too urgent in the district. I hurried down to headquarters. When I arrived, the meeting was in session, just as I expected, and word had been left that it was not to be disturbed by anyone. It was obvious that they hadn't forgotten to notify me. I left the building in a rage. Very well, I thought. When they do decide to call me, they'll have to find me. I should never have been shifted in the first place. And now that I was sent back to clean up the mess, they should aid me as quickly as possible. I would do no more running downtown, nor would I accept any program that they sent up without consulting the Harlem Committee. Then I decided, of all things, to shop for a pair of new shoes, and walked over to Fifth Avenue. It was hot. The walks still filled with noontime crowds moving with reluctance back to their jobs. I moved along close to the curb to avoid the bumping and agitated changes of pace. The chattering women in summer dresses, finally entering the leather-smelling, air-cooled interior of the shoe store with a sense of relief. My feet felt light in the new summer shoes as I went back into the blazing heat. And I recalled the old boyhood pleasure of discarding winter shoes for sneakers and the neighborhood foot races that always followed. That light-footed, speedy floating sensation. Well, I thought, you've run your last foot race and you'd better get back to the district in case you're called. I hurried now, my feet feeling trim and light as I moved through the oncoming rush of sun-beaten faces. To avoid the crowd on 42nd Street, I turned off at 43rd, and it was here that things began to boil. A small fruit wagon with an array of bright peaches and pears stood near the curb, and the vendor, a florid woman with bulbous nose and bright black Italian eyes, looked at me knowingly from beneath his huge white and orange umbrella, then over toward a crowd that had formed alongside the building across the street. What's wrong with him, I thought. Then I was across the street and passing the group, standing with their backs to me. A clipped, insinuating voice spilled words whose meaning I couldn't catch, and I was about to pass on when I saw the boy. He was a slender brown fellow whom I recognized immediately as a close friend of Clifton's, and who now was looking intently across the tops of cars to where down the block near the post office on the other side a tall policeman was approaching. Perhaps he'll know something, I thought, as he looked around to see me and stopped in confusion. "Hello there," I began, and when he turned toward the crowd and whistled, I didn't know whether he was telling me to do the same or signaling to someone else. I swung around, seeing him step to where a large carton sat beside the building and sling its canvas straps to his shoulder as once more he looked toward the policeman, ignoring me. Puzzled, I moved into the crowd and pressed to the front, where at my feet I saw a square piece of cardboard upon which something was moving with furious action. It was some kind of toy, and I glanced at the crowd's fascinated eyes, and down again, seeing it clearly this time. I'd seen nothing like it before. A grinning doll of orange and black tissue paper with thin, flat, cardboard discs forming its head and feet, in which some mysterious mechanism was causing to move up and down in a loose-jointed, shoulder-shaking, infuriatingly sensuous motion, a dance that was completely detached from the black, mask-like face. It's no jumping jack, but what? I thought, seeing the doll throwing itself about with fierce defiance of someone performing a degrading act in public, dancing as though it received a perverse pleasure from its motions. And beneath the chuckles of the crowd I could hear the swishing of its ruffled paper, while the same out-of-the-corner of the mouth voice continued to spiel. Shake it up, he's Sambo, the dancing doll. Ladies and gentlemen, shake him up, stretch him by the neck and set him down. He'll do the rest, yes, he'll make you laugh, he'll make you sigh, he'll make you want to dance and dance. Here you are, ladies and gentlemen, Sambo, the dancing doll. Buy one for your baby. Take him to your girlfriend and she'll love you. Love you. He'll keep you entertained. He'll make you weep sweet tears from laughing. shake him, you cannot break him, for he's Sambo, the dancing Sambo, the prancing Sambo, the entrancing Sambo boogie woogie paper doll. And all for 25 cents, the quarter part of $1. Ladies and gentlemen, he'll bring you joy. Step up and meet him, Sambo the... I knew I should get back to the district, but I was held by the inanimate, boneless bouncing of the grinning doll, and struggled between the desire to join in the laughter and to leap upon it with both feet, when it suddenly collapsed and I saw the tip of the speaker's toe press upon the circular cardboard that formed the feet of a broad black hand coming down, its fingers deftly lifting the doll's head and stretching it upward, twice its length, then releasing it to dance again. And suddenly, the voice didn't go with the hand. It was as though I had waded out into a shallow pool, only to have the bottom drop out and the water close over my head. I looked up. "Not you," I began. But his eyes looked past me, deliberately unseeing. I was paralyzed, looking at him, knowing I wasn't dreaming, hearing. What makes him happy, what makes him dance, this Sambo, this Jambo, this high-stepping joy boy. He's more than a toy. Ladies and gentlemen, he's Sambo, the dancing doll, the 20th century miracle. Look at that rumba. Look that Suzy Q. Look at that rumba, that Suzy Q. He's Sambo Boogie, Sambo Woogie. You don't have to feed him. He sleeps collapsed. He'll kill your depression and your dispossession. He lives upon the sunshine of your lordly smile. And only 25 cents, the brotherly 2 bits of $1 because he wants to... The brotherly 2 bits of $1 because he wants me to eat. It gives me pleasure to see me eat. It gives him pleasure to see me eat. You simply take him and shake him, and he does the rest. Thank you, lady. It was Clifton, riding easily back and forth in his knees, flexing his legs without shifting his feet, his right shoulder raised at an angle, and his arm pointing stiffly at the bouncing doll as he spilled from the corner of his mouth. The whistle came again, and I saw him glance quickly toward his lookout, the boy with the carton. Who else wants little Sambo before we take it on the Lambo? Speak up, ladies and gentlemen. Who wants little... And again the whistle. Who wants Sambo, the dancing, prancing... Hurry, hurry, ladies and gentlemen. There's no license for little Sambo, the joy spreader. You can't tax joy. So speak up, ladies and gentlemen. For a second, our eyes met, and he gave me a contemptuous smile. Then he spilled again. I felt betrayed. I looked at the doll and felt my throat constrict. The rage welled behind the phlegm as I rocked back on my heels and crouched forward. There was a flash of whiteness and a splatter like heavy rain striking a newspaper, and I saw the doll go over backwards, wilting into a dripping rag of frilled tissue. The hateful head, upturned on its outstretched neck, still grinning toward the sky. The crowd turned on me indignantly. The whistle came again. I saw a short, pot-bellied man look down, then up at me with amazement and explode with laughter, pointing from me to the doll, rocking. People backed away from me. I saw Clifton step close to the building where beside the fellow with the carton, I now saw a whole chorus line of dolls flouncing themselves with a perverse increase of energy, and the crowd laughing hysterically. You You, I began, only to see him pick up two of the dolls and step forward, but now the lookout came close. He's coming, he said, nodding toward the approaching policeman as he swept up the dolls, dropping them into the carton and starting away. Follow little Sambo around the corner, ladies and gentlemen, Clifton called. There's a great show coming up. It happened so fast that in a second only, I and an old lady in a blue polka dot dress were left. She looked at me, then back to the walk, smiling. I saw one of the dolls. She was still smiling, and I raised my foot to crush it, hearing her cry, "Oh no!" The policeman was just opposite, and I reached down instead, picking it up and walking off in the same motion. I examined it, strangely weightless in my hand, half expecting to feel it pulse with life. It was still a frill of paper. I dropped it in the pocket where I carried Brother Tarp's chain link and started after the vanished crowd. But I couldn't face Clifton again. I didn't want to see him. I might forget myself and attack him. I went in the other direction, toward 6th Avenue, past the policeman. What a way to find him, I thought. What had happened to Clifton? It was all so wrong, so unexpected. How on earth could he drop from brotherhood to this in so short a time? And why, if he had to fall back, did he try to carry the whole structure with him? What would non-members who knew him say? It was as though he had chosen. How had he put it the night he fought with Ross? To fall out of history. Saturn rises. I stopped in the middle of the walk with the thought to plunge, he had said. But he knew that only in the brotherhood could we make ourselves known, could we avoid being empty Sambo dolls. Such an obscene flouncing of everything human. Mon Dieu. And I had been worrying about being left out of a meeting. I'd overlooked it 1,000 times, no matter why I wasn't called. I'd overlook it 1,000 times, no matter why I wasn't called. I'd forgot it and hold on I'd forget it and hold on desperately to brotherhood with all my strength. For to break away would be to plunge. To plunge. And those dolls, where had they found them? Why had he picked that way to earn a quarter? Why not sell apples or song sheets or shine shoes? I wandered past the subway and continued around the corner to 42nd Street, my mind grappling for meaning. And when I came around the corner, onto the crowd walked into the sun. They were already lining the curb and shading their faces with their hands. I saw the traffic moving with the lights, and across the street a few pedestrians were looking back toward the center of the block, where the trees of Bryant Park rose above two men. I saw a flight of pigeons whirl out of the trees, and it all happened in the swift interval of their circling, very abruptly, and in the noise of the traffic, yet seeming to unfold in my mind like a slow-motion movie run off with the soundtrack dead. An aside, but related, hexagram 41 of the I Ching, the sun hexagram are 6 of batons, earth of water, sun, diminution, be sincere. The price is not the measure of the sacrifice. Leave business to help friends, but yet be wary. Guard against action. Of the cash be chary. 3 walk, one's gone. 1 walks and meets a 2. By friendship one finds woes becoming few. Here's tortoise shells from the chosen few. Prudent, though kind, well served by friends or dignity. Hexagram 42, the E hexagram, septum batons, air fire. Ye, increase. Now's no time to sit and shiver, but to move on, even to cross the river. Success excuses boldness. Face thy fate. Good omens and true virtue joined. Essay. Ill leads to well, for him who leads the way. Even the capital remove he may. Let all men share in thine approved estates. By soul's disordered realms disintegrate. Translation by Edward Alexander Crowley, commonly known as Aleister Crowley. At first I thought it was a cop and a shoeshine boy. Then there was a break in the traffic, and across the sun-glaring bands of trolley rails I recognized Clifton. His partner had disappeared now, and Clifton had the box slung to his left shoulder, with the cop moving slowly behind and to one side of him. They were coming my way, passing a newsstand, and I saw the rails in the asphalt and a fire plug at the curb and the flying birds, and thought, you'll have to follow and pay his fine. Just as the cop pushed him, jolting him forward, and Clifton trying to keep the box from swinging against his leg, and saying something over his shoulder, and going forward as one of the pigeons swung down into the street and up again, leaving a feather floating, white in the dazzling backlight of the sun. And I could see the cop push Clifton again, stepping solidly forward in his black shirt, his arm shooting out stiffly, sending him in a head-snapping forward stumble until he caught himself, saying something over his shoulder again, the two moving in a kind of march that I'd seen many times, but never with anyone like Clifton. And I could see the cop bark a command and lunge forward, thrusting out his hand and missing, thrown off balance as suddenly Clifton spun on his toes like a dancer and swung his right arm over and around in a short, jolting arc, his torso carrying forward and to the left in a motion that sent the box strap free as his right foot traveled forward and his left arm followed through in a floating uppercut that sent the cop's cap sailing into the street and his feet flying to drop him hard, rocking from left to right on the walk as Clifton kicked the box, thudding aside and crouched, his left foot forward, his hands high, waiting. And between the flashing of cars, I could see the cop propping himself on his elbows like a drunk, trying to get his head up, shaking it and thrusting it forward, and somewhere between the dull roar of traffic and the subway vibrating underground, I heard rapid explosions and saw each pigeon diving wildly as though blackjacked by the sound. As the cop sitting up straight now, and rising to his knees, looking steadily at Clifton, and the pigeons plummeting swiftly into the street, and the pigeons plummeting swiftly into the trees, and Clifton, still facing the cop and suddenly crumpling. He fell forward on his knees like a man saying his prayers, just as a heavy-set man in a hat with a turned-down brim stepped from around the newsstand and yelled a protest. I could move. The sun seemed to scream an inch above my head. Someone shouted. A few men were starting into the street. The cop was standing now and looking down at Clifton as though surprised, the gun in his hand. I took a few steps forward, walking blindly now, unthinking. Yet my mind registering it all vividly, across and starting up on the curb and seeing Clifton up closer, lying in the same position, on his side, a huge wetness growing on his shirt. And I couldn't set my foot down. Cars sailed close behind me, but I couldn't take the step that would raise me up to the walk. I stood there, one leg in the street and the other raised above the curb, hearing whistles screeching, and looked toward the library to see two cops coming on in a lunging, big-bellied run. I looked back to Clifton. The cop was waving me away with his gun, sounding like a boy with a changing voice. "Get back on this other side," he said. He was a cop that I'd passed on 43rd a few minutes before. My mouth was dry. The I Ching by Lao Tzu, hexagram 43. The Kwai hexagram 8 of Betons. Walter of Lingam. Kwai. Cutting off displeasure, front thy foe, but show reluctance due in acting so. Lay well thy plans before the march begins. Seek loyal friends and have no fear of gins. Fight on alone, persistent, courage wins. Defeated, acquiesce, smiles conquer grins. Uproot small men like purslane, tan their skins. Cut off is he, and evil his envy. He's a friend of mine. I want to help, I said, finally stepping upon the curb. He don't need no help, Junior. Get across that street. The cop's hair hung on the sides of his face. His uniform was dirty, and I watched him without emotion, hesitated, hearing the sound of footfalls approaching. Everything seemed slowed down. A pool formed slowly on the walk. My eyes blurred. I raised my head. The cop looked at me curiously. Above in the park I could hear the furious flapping of wings. On my neck, the pressure of eyes. I turned. A round-headed, apple-cheeked boy with thickly freckled nose and a Slavic eyes. A round-headed, apple-cheeked boy with thickly freckled nose and Slavic eyes leaned over the fence of the park above. And now as he saw me turn, he shrilled something to someone behind him, his face lighting up with ecstasy. What does it mean? I wondered, turning back to that which I did not wish to turn. There were 3 cops now, one watching the crowd and the others looking at Clifton. The first cop had his cap on again. Look, Junior, he said very clearly, I had enough trouble for today. You going to get on across that street. I opened my mouth, but nothing would come. Kneeling, one of the cops was examining Clifton and making notes on a pad. I'm his friend, I said. And the one making notes looked up. He's a cooked pigeon, Mac, he said. You ain't got any friend anymore. I looked at him. Hey, Mickey, the boy above us called. The guy's out cold. I looked down. That's right, the kneeling cop said. What's your name? I told him. I answered his questions about Clifton as best I could until the wagon came. For once it came quickly. I watched numbly as they moved him inside, placing the box of dolls in with him. Across the street, the crowd still churned. Then the wagon was gone and I started back toward the subway. Say, mister, the boy's voice shrilled down, your friend sure know how to use his dukes. Biff, bang! 1, 2, and the cop's on his ass. I bowed my head to this final tribute. And now, walking away in the sun, I tried to erase the scene from my mind. I wandered down the subway stairs, seeing nothing, my mind plunging. The subway was cool and I leaned against a pillar, hearing the roar of trains passing across on the other side, feeling the rushing roar of air. Why should a man deliberately plunge outside of history and peddle an obscenity? My mind went on abstractedly. Why should he choose to disarm himself, give up his voice, and leave the only organization offering him a chance to define himself? The platform vibrated and I looked down. Bits of paper whirled up in the passage of air, settling quickly as a train moved past. Why had he turned away? Why had he chosen to step off the platform and fall beneath the train? Why did he choose to plunge into nothingness, into the void of faceless faces, of soundless voices lying outside history? I tried to step away and look at it from a distance of words read in books, half remembered. For history records the patterns of men's lives, they say. Hence this book's focus on historical simulacra. Who slept with whom and with what results? Who fought and who won and who lived to lie about it afterwards? All things, it is said, are duly recorded. All things are important, that is. But not quite. For actually, it is only the known, the seen, the heard, and only those events that the recorder regards as important that are put down. Those lies his keepers keep their powers by. But the cop would be Clifton's historian, his judge, his witness, and his executioner, and I was the only brother in the watching crowd, and I, the only witness for the defense, knew neither the extent of his guilt nor the nature of his crime. Where were the historians today, and how would they put it down? I stood there with the trains plunging in and out, throwing blue sparks. What did they ever think of us transitory ones? Gypsies. One such as I had been before I found brotherhood, birds of passage who were too obscure to learn classification, too silent for the most sensitive recorders of sound, of natures too ambiguous for the most ambiguous words, and too distant from the centers of historical decision to sign or even to applaud the signers of historical documents. We who write no novels, histories, or other books. What about us, I thought, seeing Clifton again in my mind and going to sit upon a bench as a cool gust of air rolled up the tunnel. A body of people came down the platform, some of them Negroes. Yes, I thought, what about those of us who shoot up from the south into the busy city like wild jacks in the box broken loose from our springs, so sudden that our gait becomes like that of deep-sea divers suffering from the bends? What about those fellows waiting still and silent there on the platform, so still and silent that they clash with the crowds in their very immobility, standing noisy in their very silence, harsh as a cry of terror in their quietness? What about those three boys, coming now along the platform, tall and slender, walking stiffly with swinging shoulders in their well-pressed, too hot for summer suits, their collars high and tight around their necks, their identical hats of black cheap felt set upon the crowns of their heads with a severe formality above their hair, hard-combed hair. It was as though I'd never seen their like before, walking slowly, their shoulders swaying, their legs swinging from their hips in trousers that ballooned upward from cuffs fitting snug around their ankles, their coats long and hip-tight, with shoulders far too broad to be those of natural Western men. These fellows whose bodies seemed, what had one of my teachers said of me? You're like one of those African sculptures, distorted in the interest of a design. Well, what design and whose? I stared as they seemed to move like dancers in some kind of funeral ceremony, swaying, going forward, their black faces secret, moving slowly down the subway platform, the heavy, heel-plated shoes making a rhythmical tapping as they moved. Everyone must have seen them, or heard their muted laughter, or smelled the heavy pomade of their hair, or perhaps failed to see those angels at all. For they were men outside of historical time. They were untouched. They didn't believe in brotherhood, no doubt had never heard of it, or perhaps like Clifton would mysteriously have rejected its mysteries. Men of transition whose faces were immobile. I got up and went behind them. Women shoppers with bundles and impatient men in straw hats and seersucker suits stood along the platform as they passed, and suddenly I found myself thinking, do they come to bury the others or to be entombed, to give life or to receive it? Do the others see them, think about them, even though standing close enough to speak? And if they spoke back, would the impatient businessmen in conventional suits and tired housewives with their plunder understand? What would they say? For the boys speak a jived up transitional language full of country glamour, think transitional thoughts, though perhaps they dream the same old ancient dreams. They were men out of time. They were men out of time, unless they found brotherhood. Men out of time who would soon be gone and forgotten. But who knew? And now I began to tremble so violently I had to lean against a refuse can. Who knew but that they were the saviors, the true leaders, the bearers of something precious, the stewards of something uncomfortable, burdensome, which they hated because, living outside the realm of history, there was no one to applaud their value, and they themselves failed to understand it. What if Brother Jack were wrong? What if history was a gambler instead of a force in a laboratory experiment, and the boys his ace in the hole? What if history was not a reasonable citizen, but a madman full of paranoid gall, and those boys his agents, his big surprise, his own revenge? For they were outside in the dark with Sambo, the dancing paper doll, taking it on the Lambo with my fallen brother Todd Clifton. Todd. Thought. Running and dodging the forces of history instead of making a dominating stand. A train came. Jesus wept. I followed them inside. There were many seats, and the three sat together. I stood holding onto the center pole, looking down the length of the car. On one side I saw a white nun in black telling her beads, and standing before the door across the aisle, there was another dressed completely in white, the exact duplicate of the other, except that she was black and her black feet bare. None of the nuns was looking at the other, but at their crucifixes. And suddenly, I laughed, and a verse I heard long ago at the Golden Day paraphrased itself in my mind. Bread and wine, your cross ain't nearly so heavy as mine. And the nuns rode on with lowered heads. I looked at the boys. They sat as formally as they walked. From time to time, one of them would look at his reflection in the window and give his hat brim a snap. The others watching him silently, communicating ironically with their eyes, then looking straight ahead. I staggered with the lunging of the train, feeling the overhead fans driving the hot air down upon me. What was I in relation to the boys, I wondered? Perhaps an accident, like Douglas. Perhaps each 100 years or so, men like them, like me, appeared in society, drifting through, And yet, by all historical logic, I should have disappeared around the first part of the 19th century, rationalized out of existence. Perhaps, like them, I was a throwback, a small, distant meteorite that died several hundred years ago and now lived only by virtue of the light that speeds through space at too great a pace to realize that its source has become a piece of lead. This was silly, such thoughts. I looked at the boys. One tapped another on the knee, and I saw him remove 3 rolled magazines from an inner pocket, passing 2 around and keeping one for himself. The others took theirs silently and began to read in complete absorption. One held his magazine high before his face, and for an instant I saw a vivid scene. The shining rails, the fire hydrant, the fallen policeman, the diving birds, and in the midground, Clifton crumpling. Then I saw the cover of a comic book and thought, Clifton would have known them better than I. He knew them all the time. I studied them closely until they left the train, their shoulders rocking, their heavy heel plates clicking remote, cryptic messages in the brief silence of the train's stop. I came out of the subway, weak, moving through the heat as though I carried a heavy stone, the weight of a mountain on my shoulders. My new shoes hurt my feet. Now moving through the crowds along 125th Street, I was painfully aware of other men dressed like the boys, and of girls in dark, exotic colored stockings, their costumes surreal variations of downtown styles. 1 plus 25 is 26. The Tahu hexagram, 5 gladi, earth of lingam, Tahu. The great accumulation, quit thy private virtue when state needeth it. Peril, move not, but look within thine heart. Then, with due care, be ready for the start. Now, with good horse, well trained, play hard thy part. Block even the young bull's horns. He's safer so. Castrate the boar, its teeth will gently show. Then rule the stars, good fortune aid thine art. I was painfully aware of other men dressed like boys, and of girls in dark exotic colored stockings. Their costumes, surreal variations of downtown styles. They'd been there all along, but somehow I'd missed them. I'd missed them even when my work had been most successful. They were outside the groove of history, and it was my job to get them in, all of them. I looked into the design of their faces, hardly a one that was unlike someone I'd known down south. Forgotten names sang through my head like forgotten scenes in dreams. I moved with the crowd, the sweat pouring off me, listening to the grinding roar of traffic, the growing sound of a record shop loudspeaker blaring a languid blues. I stopped. Was this all that would be recorded? Was this the only true history of the times? A mood blared by trumpets, trombones, saxophones, and drums? A song with turgid, inadequate words? My mind flowed. It was as though in this short block I was forced to walk past everyone I'd ever known, and no one would smile or call my name, the bardo. No one fixed me in his eyes. I walked in feverish isolation. Near the corner now, a couple of boys darted out of the 5 and 10 with handfuls of candy bars, dropping them along the walks as they ran with a man right behind. They came toward me, pumping past, and I killed an impulse to trip the man and was confused all the more when an old woman standing further along threw out her bag and swung. And I killed an impulse to trip the man and was confused all the more when an old woman standing alone threw out her leg and swung a heavy bag. The man went down, sliding across the walk as she shook her head in triumph. A pleasure of guilt came over me. I stood on the edge of the walk watching the crowd threatening to attack the man, until a policeman appeared and dispersed them. And although I knew no one could do much about it, I felt responsible. All our work had been very little. No great change had been made, and it was all my fault. I'd been so fascinated by the motion that I'd forgotten to measure what it was bringing forth. I'd been asleep, dreaming.